Don't Google Lovecraft's cat.
Comments about H.P. Lovecraft's cat's name is just trolling, trying to get you to Google something incredibly racist. On every post I do about Lovecraft, I get many of these comments from anonymous accounts that don't follow me. It's just trolling. I'm going to post the censored version of the name at the end of the video, so it's easy to stop before it, and so the algorithm doesn't take the video down. The name isn't particularly interesting, it's just very racist. It isn't some secret, it's used in his tale Rats in the Walls. But I'm going to use this as an excuse to talk about Lovecraft's prejudices, the incredible amount of misconceptions around his life, and finally why his work is still relevant for a lot of people, including BIPOC artists Lovecraft himself would have hated. Lovecraft is one of the few topics where I've read enough of his work, the biographies and the literary criticism around him to claim any sort of vague expertise, but it's been years since I delved deeply last and I didn't have time to refresh much of my knowledge, so comment if I get anything wrong. If you want more long and better research videos, please become a channel member or support on Patreon or buy stuff at denungeherrholm.com because it's a lot of work to write these. I release all my art for free use, so the art in this video is available for free download to use how you please. And now let's talk racism and why you still might want to care about Lovecraft. Apologists seem to default to 3 different arguments about why you should ignore Lovecraft's racism. All of these arguments are wrong and based on a lack of knowledge and understanding about Lovecraft's work and life. The first false argument is that Lovecraft was just a product of his time. The second wrong argument is that you can just separate the art from the artist. And the third wrong argument is that he got less racist towards the end of his life. Hopefully I can show where all 3 arguments fail. First, Howard Phillips Lovecraft lived from 1890 to 1937 in Providence, Rhode Island, USA. This was the height of scientific racism and pseudosciences like phrenology. The mainstream Western world wouldn't start reckoning with this until after World War II and even later. Yet Lovecraft was actually exposed to other ideas, he just rejected them. Despite being largely raised by a black nanny, Lovecraft wrote incredibly racist poetry as a child, went on to publish his amateur journal The Conservative, and wrote pages up and down of his racist theories in his letters. His stay in New York from 1924 to 1926 made his racism more visceral, and his Jewish wife at the time, Sonia Green, claimed he got panic attacks from seeing black people. His close Jewish friend Samuel Loveman felt so betrayed when he was told about his anti-Semitism after his death that he'd burned all their letters. In an incredibly racist time, Lovecraft was a dedicated racist. Now, second, can't you just separate the art from the artist? Well, Lovecraft's racism, classism, misogyny, and conservatism is on display in his art because Lovecraft, contrary to popular belief, didn't want to write cheap trills for the pulp horror magazine audience. Lovecraft wanted to write art for art's sake. In his best work, usually the ones written on his own accord and getting rejected by the magazines, he wrote to express himself deeply and truly, and his political, philosophical, and racist beliefs are in every element of the text. Let's use the brilliant Shadow over Innsmouth as an example. Everything in this gripping tale is centered around his fear of interbreeding, of inbreeding, of other cultures being superior to his own, and of deep secrets in his own blood. And his worst stories, often ghostwritten for others or written on spec for magazines, he's such a bad pulp writer that he still can't shut up about his beliefs. The last argument is that Lovecraft overcame his racism with age, or at least some of it. And yes, he did become more politically progressive, something you can find in stories like The Shadow Out of Time with its utopian alien society, and he did become more tolerant of cultures he thought could assimilate into Anglo-Saxon culture, like Scandinavians, Irish, and even some Jews. But it didn't change. Some of the worst and the most developed racist, misogynist, and classist thing he ever wrote is in late stories such as Shadow Shadow over Innsmouth, The Thing on the Doorstep, and The Dunwich Horror. And his so-called political progressivism was still an utopian dream of a society ruled by a tiny elite of Anglo-Saxon intellectuals, kind of like a twist of the dreamed-up philosopher kings of ancient Greece. Now let's jump from the apologists to the misconceptions of those who think that Lovecraft should be left on the racist junkyard of history. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that anyone should have to like Lovecraft or arguing for him being in curriculums. I'm simply trying to clear up things that are factually wrong. First, a strange comment that I've heard a lot is that Lovecraft was scientifically illiterate and wrote stories because he was afraid of new inventions and discoveries like air conditioners and the invisible light spectrum. Of course, just by reading his work you can see that this is wrong. He got a lot of science right in his stories, from state-of-the-art polar expedition equipment to the continental drift theory and Einstein's relativity theory, and a few things wrong, like believing in scientific racism. Lovecraft was a science geek. In his teens he wrote science articles for local newspapers, and all his life he tried to keep up with the latest developments. Which is why most of his major work, his truly Lovecraftian work, is considered a form of science fiction. Then there's the characterization of how bad Lovecraft was as a person. He was a hack, insane, chronically depressed, an asshole, a loner, antisocial, and so on. Yeah, Lovecraft did struggle. Both his parents died in a mental hospital, and especially the loss of his mother after a nervous breakdown when Howard was in his late 20s affected him much. Had he lived today, he might have been diagnosed with something, and he might have had real anxiety about his heritage and ending up like his parents. And yes, he was a loner for part of his life, and he lived off his mother and then his wife and then his aunts, never fully being able to support himself. But he was also clearly sane. In periods of his life he was very social, and his friends describe him as friendly, witty, and enjoying to be the slightly awkward life of the non-alcoholic party, since Lovecraft never touched a drink, except one time where he perhaps took one sip of a drink one of his friends had spiked with alcohol. In his non-social periods he still wrote pages of letters, all strikingly coherent, and in the last decade of his life he traveled a lot over parts of North America. It's important to know that most people are not cartoon villains, even though it's scary to think that someone can be friendly, caring, humorous, intelligent, knowledgeable, talented, and also horribly racist. Because if that's true, then any of us can have terrible parts, some of which we might not even be aware of. In his writing, Lovecraft struggled to reach the impossible literary goal of describing an indescribable fear, and that drive had to come from his own ugly fears. His worst stories are cringy pulp written for a quick buck, but his best work is art for art's sake, written in his own peculiar voice, very often based on dreams and subconscious streams of thought. He was extremely particular about what he put into his own tales, yet he put ideas into his art he never quite were aware of, and that's why he's such a fascinating writer on the topic of irrational fear in a modern age of rationality. It's a cliché that seeing the elder gods or Cthulhu in Lovecraft's tales drives people insane in some magical way, but the actual effect is much more sinister. What drives the Lovecraftian protagonists insane is the shock of humanity being relegated to insubstantial bit players in the cosmos. His alien races are not only gruesomely strange, but always superior physically, intellectually, and culturally to us. And deep in the bloodline, there's always a secret that will rise up when the stars are right and prove everything they know wrong. When the narrator of The Shadow over Innsmouth, spoilers, goes to live with the fish people underwater, that's as close as a happy ending you get in Lovecraft. In his essay Supernatural Horror in Literature, Lovecraft opens with the oldest and the strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. But for Lovecraft, this could have just as well been the oldest and the strongest kind of fear is the fear of the self. Lovecraft's writing teaches us in transformatively poetic ways of the ugliness of the insecurity that leads to hatred. Now finally, Lovecraft's cat's name. Again, it's not interesting and I will be censoring it. But I'll do my little end of the video bit first and give you a last warning and display the censored version. There's a ton more to say about Lovecraft and a ton of other topics, but in order to do more long-form content, I need to expand my team and to get people to help with editing, research, filming and all that other stuff. I'm just a stupid fucking artist. In order for this stupid artist to do all that, I need your support. You can support by becoming a channel member on YouTube or a patron on patreon.com/KimHolm or buying something from my web store denungeherholm.com. And if you don't have any money, you can support by using my art. All my art is released for free use under a Creative Commons Attribution license, so you can do whatever you want with it, including selling it for a profit, as long as you put my name on it. Now is the last chance to turn back. The name of Lovecraft's cat was Man. Sorry, that's the banality, the insidious banality of racism for you.